My name is Amara, and I am 36 years old. When my brother Nathan suggested a family reunion trip to Jordan, I hesitated because of the travel warnings. But my daughter Sydney, 16, was so excited to finally connect with her cousins. I never imagined those same cousins would abandon her in a crowded marketplace without her passport, leaving her terrified and alone in a foreign country. The moment I saw Jackson laugh and say, "That was hilarious," I knew our family would never be the same. If you are watching this from anywhere in the world, please hit like and subscribe to hear how security ended up banging on their door the next morning. Life as a single mother has never been easy. But Sydney and I have always made it work. After my divorce 8 years ago, when Sydney was just 8, we built our little two-person world together. We lived in a modest two-bedroom apartment in Minneapolis, and I worked as a marketing coordinator for a local company. The pay was decent enough to keep us comfortable, but luxury vacations were definitely not in our budget. Sydney never complained, though. She was the kind of kid who found joy in simple things like our weekend hikes at the state park or movie nights with homemade popcorn. My brother Nathan, on the other hand, lived a completely different life. After getting into tech investments early, he had accumulated significant wealth and never hesitated to flaunt it. His mansion in the suburbs, luxury cars, and designer wardrobe were constant reminders of the financial gap between our lives. Nathan had 2 children with his wife Lauren, who unfortunately passed away from cancer 3 years ago. Their son Jackson was 19, and their daughter Brooke was 17. To put it bluntly, my niece and nephew were spoiled beyond belief. Growing up with unlimited access to money and minimal parental guidance had turned them into entitled teenagers who viewed the world as their personal playground. Jackson was in his first year at an Ivy League university, though from what Nathan mentioned, he spent more time partying than studying. Brooke was in her senior year of high school and already had a reputation for her social media presence, showcasing lavish shopping sprees and exotic vacations. Our families rarely spent time together despite living just 40 minutes apart. Nathan was always busy with work, and when we did see each other at occasional holiday gatherings, the difference in our lifestyles created an uncomfortable distance. Sydney had tried to connect with her cousins when they were younger, but Jackson and Brooke made it clear they found her basic and uninteresting. So, when Nathan called me out of the blue in February with an invitation for a 2-family trip to Jordan in April, I was genuinely surprised. "It is time our families reconnected," he insisted over the phone. "The kids are getting older, and family should be important. I want Jackson and Brooke to know their cousin better." I immediately had concerns. Jordan is on the State Department list as a Level 3 Do Not Travel advisory. There are security concerns, especially near certain borders. Nathan laughed dismissively. "Those warnings are for regular tourists, Amara. We will be staying at 5-star resorts and traveling with private guides. Money solves all those security issues." His confidence was both irritating and slightly persuasive. He continued by explaining he would cover all expenses, including new wardrobes for Sydney and me, appropriate for the climate and culture. When I mentioned the invitation to Sydney that evening, she was unexpectedly enthusiastic. "Mom, this could be amazing. I have always wanted to see Petra and the Dead Sea, and maybe Jackson and Brooke have matured. It would be nice to actually have a relationship with my only cousins." Her hopeful expression wore down my resistance. Sydney had never traveled internationally before, and despite my concerns about Nathan and his children, the opportunity seemed too significant to refuse. Plus, the financial burden would be entirely on Nathan, making it our only chance for such an experience. Over the next weeks, we prepared intensively for the trip. I researched Jordanian culture, appropriate dress codes for women, and important Arabic phrases. We spent hours at the passport office getting Sydney her first passport and arranging for visas. I made copies of all our important documents and created a shared online folder with our itinerary, emergency contacts, and the addresses of the American Embassy in Amman. The night before our departure, I sat Sydney down for a serious conversation about safety abroad. "Always keep your passport in the hotel safe, but carry a photocopy with you," I instructed. "Never go anywhere alone. Even if Jackson and Brooke try to convince you it is fine, and always respect local customs, especially regarding modest dress in religious areas." Sydney nodded attentively. "I know, Mom. I have been studying up too. Jordan is actually considered one of the safer Middle Eastern countries for tourists, but I will be careful." Our flight to Amman was long, but uneventful. Nathan had booked us all in business class, which was a first for Sydney and me. My daughter spent most of the flight watching movies and chatting excitedly about all the sights she wanted to see. I tried to share her enthusiasm, but a nagging worry persisted in the back of my mind. When we landed, a private car whisked us to the Four Seasons Hotel in Amman, a gleaming marble and glass structure that exuded luxury. Our room was spacious, with 2 queen beds, a stunning bathroom with a soaking tub, and a balcony overlooking the city. Sydney immediately took photos to share with her friends back home. "Can you believe this, Mom? It is like we are royalty or something," she exclaimed, bouncing on the plush bed. Nathan and his children were in a separate wing of the hotel in what I later learned was the royal suite. We met them for dinner at the hotel restaurant, where Jackson and Brooke arrived 15 minutes late, both engrossed in their phones. "Nice to see you again, Aunt Amara," Jackson said without looking up from his screen. "Sydney, you look different than I remembered." Brooke barely acknowledged our presence, simply nodding before turning to her father. "Dad, can we order champagne? The drinking age here is not like at home." Nathan nodded indulgently while I tried to hide my disapproval. Throughout dinner, the cousins made minimal effort to engage with Sydney, instead talking about their private school friends and previous vacations to places like the Maldives and Monaco. Sydney tried valiantly to participate, asking questions and showing genuine interest in their lives, but was repeatedly cut off or ignored. "So, what do you do for fun in Minneapolis? Was it?" Brooke finally asked Sydney with a slightly condescending tone. "I am on the debate team at school," Sydney answered brightly, "and I volunteer at an animal shelter on weekends. Plus, Mom and I hike a lot." Jackson snorted. "Sounds thrilling. We just got back from Aspen for spring break. I am training for competitive snowboarding." I noticed Sydney deflate slightly, but she maintained her smile. Later, back in our room, she tried to stay positive. "They are probably just tired from the flight," she reasoned. "Tomorrow will be better when we start exploring." I hoped she was right, but my instincts were already setting off alarm bells. Our first full day in Jordan seemed to validate Sydney's optimism. We visited the ancient Roman ruins of Jerish, where our knowledgeable guide, Ahmed, explained the historical significance of each crumbling column and archway. The sun was bright, but not unbearably hot, and the site was impressively preserved. Sydney was in her element, asking thoughtful questions and taking notes in the small journal she had brought specifically for the trip. This civilization was so advanced for its time, she marveled as we walked through the colonnaded streets. Can you imagine what it looked like when it was full of people in togas going about their daily lives? Even Jackson and Brooke seemed momentarily impressed by the grandeur of the ruins, though they quickly reverted to taking selfies with the ancient structures as backdrops rather than listening to Ahmed's explanations. We enjoyed a traditional Jordanian lunch at a local restaurant where Sydney enthusiastically tried every dish, from fragrant rice with lamb to fresh hummus and tabbouleh. Nathan ordered expensive wine for himself and his children, once again ignoring the fact that Brooke was underage. "The rules are different here," he said with a wink when he caught my disapproving glance. "Cultural experiences, right?" The next day, we visited the Citadel in Amman, another archaeological site perched on the highest hill in the city. It was here that I began noticing more concerning behavior from my niece and nephew. When Ahmed politely asked Brooke to cover her shoulders before entering a historically significant mosque within the complex, she rolled her eyes dramatically. "This is so backwards," she complained loudly. "It is like 100 degrees out here." It was perhaps 75 degrees, and she was wearing a skimpy tank top that would be inappropriate in many religious sites worldwide, not just in Muslim countries. "Actually, modest dress is a sign of respect in many cultures," Sydney said quietly, already wearing the light scarf I had insisted she bring. "It is not that different from how you would dress to visit the Vatican." Brooke glared at her. "Whatever, Professor. Not all of us want to look like boring tourists." Jackson was no better, ignoring the no photography signs in several sensitive areas and climbing onto ancient structures clearly marked as off-limits. When a security guard approached him, Nathan quickly intervened, slipping the man some money to look the other way. As we left the site, Ahmed pulled me aside. "Mrs. Amara, I must respectfully suggest that you remind the young people about cultural sensitivity. Jordan welcomes tourists, but respect is very important here." I nodded, embarrassed. "I am so sorry about my niece and nephew. I will speak with their father." That evening, I attempted to discuss the issue with Nathan in the hotel lobby while the kids were getting ready for dinner. Nathan, I am concerned about how Jackson and Brooke are behaving at these sites. They are disrespecting local customs and potentially getting us all into trouble. My brother waved his hand dismissively. They are just kids having fun, Amara. Not everyone is as uptight as you are. Besides, nothing bad has happened. Money talks in countries like this, you know. His casual xenophobia made me cringe, but I persisted. It is not about money. It is about respect and safety. We are guests here, and their behavior reflects poorly on all of us. Nathan sighed dramatically. Fine, I will say something to them, but honestly, loosen up a little. This is supposed to be a vacation. Despite his promise, I saw no change in Jackson and Brooke's behavior the following day. If anything, they seemed to deliberately push boundaries further, speaking loudly and mockingly about local customs and treating service staff with contempt. That evening, I had a private conversation with Sydney in our room. I want you to be extra careful around your cousins, I told her. They do not seem to understand or care about appropriate behavior here. Sydney nodded seriously. I have noticed. Yesterday, Brooke was making fun of a woman in traditional dress when she was not looking. It was really mean. If you ever feel uncomfortable or unsafe, you come directly to me, okay? No matter what Jackson and Brooke say. I will, Mom. Do not worry so much. The next day brought the first truly alarming incident. We were having lunch at a restaurant in downtown Amman. When Sydney excused herself to use the restroom, Nathan received a business call and stepped outside. Jackson and Brooke exchanged a glance and then suddenly stood up. We are going to look at the shops across the street, Brooke announced. Tell Sydney to meet us there when she gets back. Before I could protest, they were gone. When Sydney returned a few minutes later, she looked around in confusion. Where did everyone go? Your uncle is on a call outside, and your cousins went to look at shops across the street. They said to meet them there. Sydney and I went to find them, but the shops across the street turned out to be an entire shopping district with dozens of stores. After 20 minutes of searching with no sign of them, Sydney's phone pinged with a message from Brooke back at the restaurant. Where are you guys, LOL? When we returned, all three of them were sitting calmly at the table as if nothing had happened. What happened? I demanded. We were looking everywhere for you. Jackson shrugged. We came back when we could not find anything good. Not our fault you guys took so long. Sydney looked hurt but said nothing. Later, she confessed they had done this on purpose. I heard them laughing about it when I went to get water, she said quietly. Brooke said it was funny to see me wandering around looking lost. I was furious and confronted Nathan that evening while the kids were swimming at the hotel pool. Your children deliberately ditched Sydney at the restaurant today. That is not acceptable, Nathan. My brother looked annoyed. It sounds like a simple misunderstanding to me. You are being overprotective as usual. It was not a misunderstanding. They admitted they did it on purpose to confuse her. Nathan shrugged. Kids play pranks, Amara. Sydney needs to toughen up a bit if she is going to get along in the real world. Besides, she was with you the whole time, right? No harm done. His dismissive attitude infuriated me, but arguing further seemed pointless. Instead, I took additional precautions. I began carrying Sydney's passport myself rather than leaving it in the hotel safe. I gave her extra emergency cash hidden in different places in her clothing and bag, and I made sure she had the hotel's business card with the address in both English and Arabic at all times. 2 days later, we traveled south to visit Petra, the famous archaeological site carved into rose-colored cliffs. The ancient city was truly breathtaking with its massive facades cut directly into the sandstone. Sydney was awestruck as we walked through the narrow SIQ, the dramatic entrance corridor leading to the treasury. This is the most amazing thing I have ever seen, she whispered, her face filled with wonder as the iconic facade came into view. The site was crowded with tourists from around the world, making it difficult to stay together as a group. Nathan seemed unconcerned, allowing Jackson and Brooke to wander ahead with instructions to meet at the restaurant near the exit in 3 hours. I kept Sydney close by my side, not trusting the cousins after the restaurant incident. Throughout the day, whenever we did cross paths with Jackson and Brooke, they made snide comments about Sydney's sensible hiking shoes and sun hat. Nice safari outfit, Jackson snickered. Are you looking for lions in the desert? At least I can walk comfortably, Sydney replied, glancing at Brooke's impractical sandals. And I will not have sunburn tomorrow. I was proud of her confidence, but noticed the cousins exchanging dark looks. Their hostility towards Sydney seemed to be growing, not diminishing, as the trip progressed. That night, I heard them whispering and laughing in the hotel hallway outside our room and caught the words, "Teach her," before they noticed me and quickly dispersed. My unease was growing by the day, but the worst was yet to come. On our sixth day in Jordan, we planned to visit the traditional marketplace in downtown Amman known as the souk. It was a labyrinthine complex of narrow alleys lined with colorful shops, selling everything from spices and textiles to jewelry and antiques. The market was crowded, noisy, and overwhelming to the senses, with the aromas of exotic spices mixing with perfumes, the calls of vendors competing with traditional music, and vibrant displays of goods, creating a visual feast. We arrived mid-morning when the market was already bustling with locals and tourists. The narrow walkways were packed with people, making it difficult to stay together as a group. I held tightly to Sydney's hand as we navigated the crowded spaces, not wanting to lose her in the chaos. "Stay close," I reminded her repeatedly. "It would be very easy to get lost in here." For once, Nathan seemed to be taking some responsibility, instructing Jackson and Brooke to remain with the group. "This is not the place to wander off," he said firmly, surprising me with his sudden display of parental authority. After about an hour of shopping and exploring, I felt an urgent need to use the restroom. The public facilities in the market were located near one of the main entrances, which would require backtracking through the crowds. "Nathan, I need to find a bathroom," I told my brother. "Can you keep an eye on Sydney for a few minutes? I will be right back." Nathan nodded. "Of course, we will wait right here by this carpet shop. The kids want to look at the textiles anyway." I turned to Sydney. "Stay with your uncle and cousins. Do not move from this spot, okay? I have got your passport in my bag, but here is some emergency money just in case." I slipped 50 Jordanian dinars, about $70, into her pocket. "Mom, I will be fine," Sydney assured me with a slight eye roll that reminded me she was indeed a teenager. "I am not 5 years old." With a final glance at the group, I made my way back through the crowded market toward the facilities. The bathroom had a long line, and what I thought would be a 5-minute stop turned into nearly 20 minutes. By the time I made it back to the carpet shop, my family was nowhere to be seen. My heart immediately began racing. I scanned the area, thinking they might have moved just a short distance away to look at neighboring stalls. Nothing. I called out Sydney's name, earning curious stares from nearby shoppers. I approached the carpet seller, desperately trying to communicate. "My family, my daughter," I said, showing him a photo of Sydney on my phone. "Did you see where they went?" The man shook his head, his English limited. "Many people, many tourists," he said with a shrug. Panic rising, I pushed my way through the dense crowd, searching every nearby shop and stall. The market seemed to have grown even more crowded, the noise more disorienting. I pulled out my phone to call Nathan, only to discover I had no service in the covered market. I found a slightly less crowded corner and tried to gather my thoughts. They must have simply moved to another shop. Perhaps they thought I would find them easily. Maybe Sydney had needed a bathroom too, and they had gone to look for one. But as 15 minutes turned into 30 with no sign of them, my worry turned to genuine fear. I made my way to one of the market exits, hoping to get cell service and call Nathan. Outside in the bright sunlight, my phone finally connected, and I immediately dialed my brother's number. It went straight to voicemail. "Nathan, where are you?" I practically shouted into the phone. "I cannot find you or Sydney. Call me back immediately." I sent multiple text messages to both Nathan and the kids, but received no response. I returned to the market, this time methodically working my way through each section, showing Sydney's photo to vendors and tourists alike. Most shook their heads or shrugged apologetically. Finally, an older shopkeeper, selling brass lamps, nodded in recognition when I showed him Sydney's picture. "American girl?" "Yes." "With man and 2 young people?" he asked in accented English. Yes, that is them. Did you see where they went?" Hope surged through me. The man frowned. "They leave market. Girl not want to go. I think the boy, he push her." My blood ran cold. "Push her? What do you mean?" "Not hard push," he clarified, demonstrating with a gentle shoving motion. "But girl, look, not happy. They go in taxi, that way." He pointed toward the eastern exit of the market. I thanked him profusely and rushed in the direction he had indicated, fear and anger competing for dominance in my mind. Outside, I tried Nathan's phone again. This time it rang, but he did not answer. I left another desperate message. "Nathan, a shopkeeper just told me he saw you leave with Sydney in a taxi. She apparently did not want to go. What is going on? Call me back right now." For the next hour, I wandered the streets around the market, showing Sydney's photo to taxi drivers and storekeepers, hoping someone might have seen where they went. My phone battery was running dangerously low, and my panic was becoming overwhelming. Worst-case scenarios played through my mind. Sydney lost in a foreign city. unable to communicate without her passport or proper identification. Finally, as I was considering going to the police or the American embassy, my phone chimed with a text from Nathan. Back at hotel. No big deal. No big deal? I was shaking with rage and relief as I hailed a taxi and directed the driver to our hotel. The ride felt interminable, my mind racing with questions and accusations. How could Nathan be so irresponsible? What had happened to Sydney? Why would they leave without me? When I finally arrived at the hotel, I found Nathan, Jackson, and Brooke lounging by the pool as if it were any ordinary vacation day. Sydney was nowhere in sight. "Where is my daughter?" I demanded, marching up to their table. Nathan looked up lazily from his phone. "Relax, Amara. She went up to the room, said she had a headache. You left me in the middle of a foreign market. You took my daughter without telling me. What were you thinking?" Jackson snickered, exchanging a glance with his sister. "It was just a joke, Aunt Amara. No need to freak out." "A joke? You call abandoning me and taking my child a joke?" "Dad said you were being too overprotective," Brooke chimed in, not looking up from filing her nails. "Sydney needs to learn to have fun and loosen up." I was too angry to respond further. I turned and ran to the elevator, desperate to find Sydney and make sure she was safe. When I reached our room and unlocked the door, I found my daughter curled up on the bed, her eyes red from crying. "Sydney, are you okay? What happened?" I rushed to her side, checking her for any injuries. She looked up at me, relief flooding her face. "Mom, I was so worried about you. I tried to get them to wait or go back, but they would not listen." I held her tightly, my own tears threatening to fall. "I am here now. You are safe, but I need to know exactly what happened." After comforting Sydney and making sure she was physically unharmed, I listened as she recounted what had happened at the market. The story she told made my blood boil. "After you left to find the bathroom, Jackson suggested we move to a shop selling jewelry that he had spotted earlier," Sydney explained, still visibly shaken. "Uncle Nathan said it was fine since it was just a few stalls down, but once we got there, Jackson and Brooke kept moving further and further away, always saying, 'Just one more shop,' when I reminded them we needed to stay put for you." She wiped away a tear. "Before I knew it, we were at the edge of the market. I told them we needed to go back, that you would be looking for us, but Jackson grabbed my arm and said it would be funny to make you search for a while." My fist clenched involuntarily as she continued. "Uncle Nathan was on his phone again, not really paying attention. When I tried to turn back, Brooke blocked my way and said I was being a baby. Then Jackson told me they had decided to go back to the hotel and I had to come with them." Sydney's voice cracked. "I refused and said I was going to wait for you. That is when Jackson reached into my pocket and took the emergency money you had given me. He said now I had no choice but to come with them." "They took your money?" I was incredulous. Sydney nodded. Uncle Nathan finally noticed something was wrong and asked what was happening. Jackson told him I was being difficult, and Brooke said you had agreed to meet us back at the hotel. I do not think Uncle Nathan realized that was a lie. "So they forced you into a taxi?" Jackson kept pushing me along. Not hard enough to hurt, but enough that I could not get away. Once we were in the taxi, I tried to tell Uncle Nathan the truth, but Jackson and Brooke kept talking over me. Then Jackson said something to the driver in Arabic, and the driver took a different route than we had used before. My heart sank further. "What do you mean, a different route?" "They told the driver to drop me off somewhere that was not the hotel. When the taxi stopped, they pushed me out and said to wait there, that another taxi would come for me in 15 minutes. Then they drove away." I gasped. "They left you alone on the street in a foreign city?" Sydney nodded, tears flowing freely now. "I was in some neighborhood I did not recognize. No tourists, just locals. I did not have my passport, no money, and my phone had almost no battery left. I tried calling you but could not get through." "How did you get back to the hotel?" I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. "There was this family, a local couple with 2 little girls. The woman spoke some English and could see I was in trouble. I showed them the hotel card in my pocket, and they actually drove me here themselves. They would not take any money when I offered to pay them later. The woman just hugged me and said she would hope someone would do the same for her daughters." Relief and rage warred within me. Thank God for the kindness of strangers, but my own family had deliberately put my child in danger. "I am so sorry, Sydney. This should never have happened." I held her close, feeling her tears soak into my shirt. When I got back to the hotel, Uncle Nathan and the others were already by the pool. When I told Uncle Nathan what happened, he laughed and said Jackson and Brooke were just teaching me to be more independent. He gave me $50 and told me to go buy myself something nice at the gift shop. That was the final straw. I made sure Sydney was comfortable, ordered her room service, and told her to lock the door behind me. "Where are you going?" she asked anxiously. "To have a word with your uncle and cousins. I will be back soon." I found them still lounging by the pool, now ordering cocktails from a server. The casual way they sat there, as if they had not just endangered a child, made my fury even more intense, but I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. I approached their table calmly, pulling up a chair without being invited. "We need to talk about what happened today," I said, my voice low and steady. Jackson glanced at Brooke with a smirk. "Aunt Amara, it was just a little joke. Sydney needs to lighten up." "A joke?" I repeated, looking directly at him. "You call abandoning a 16-year-old girl without money or identification in a foreign country a joke?" "That was hilarious," Jackson laughed, lounging back in his chair. "You should have seen her face when we drove away." "She looked like she was going to cry," Brooke added with a giggle. "So dramatic." I expected to feel rage at their callousness, but instead I felt an eerie calm descend over me. These privileged, spoiled children had no idea what they had done, and my brother had enabled their behavior every step of the way. Nathan finally seemed to sense the severity of the situation. "Look, Amara, maybe the kids took things a bit too far, but Sydney is fine. No harm done, right? Kids play pranks on each other. It is normal." "Normal?" I said quietly. "Let me explain what could have happened today, Nathan. Sydney could have been robbed, assaulted, or worse. She could have been arrested for being without identification. She could have been lost for hours or days in a city where she does not speak the language. Do you understand that what you all did today was not a prank, but child endangerment?" Nathan shifted uncomfortably. "You are overreacting as usual. This is why Sydney is so sheltered. You never let her experience anything on her own." "Experiencing things on her own does not mean being abandoned without resources in a potentially dangerous situation." "And taking money from her pocket, Jackson?" "It was just $50, he muttered, suddenly less cocky. "The fact that you do not understand the severity of what you did is exactly the problem. You three seem to think your wealth and privilege protect you from consequences. They do not." Nathan leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Amara, I understand you are upset. What if I compensate the family who helped Sydney, and we can upgrade your room for the rest of the trip? Would that make it better?" His attempt to solve the problem with money only confirmed everything I thought about how he had raised his children. "This is not about money, Nathan. This is about safety, respect, and basic human decency, none of which you or your children seem to understand." Brooke rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh my God, it is not like we left her in some war zone. Jordan is totally safe." "Is it?" I countered. "Because I recall your father specifically brushing off my concerns about the travel advisory by saying we would all stick together and use private guides, neither of which happened today." Nathan had the grace to look slightly ashamed. "Amara, what can I do to make this right? I admit the kids went too far. I should have paid more attention. What you can do is take responsibility for once in your life and teach your children that actions have consequences." I stood up from the table. "Sydney and I will be moving to a different hotel tomorrow. I have already made reservations, and I have contacted the American Embassy about the incident." "The embassy?" Nathan spluttered. "That is completely unnecessary." "Is it? Abandoning a minor in a foreign country without identification is a serious offense, Nathan. In fact, I believe it violates several international laws." The color drained from his face. "Amara, be reasonable. We are family." "Family does not endanger family," I replied coldly. "Sydney and I will be having dinner in our room tonight. I suggest you use this time to think about what kind of people you want your children to become, because right now they are on track to be exactly the kind of entitled, irresponsible adults that make the world a worse place." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving them stunned into silence. Back in our room, I found Sydney had ordered dinner for both of us and was looking considerably calmer. "What did they say?" she asked tentatively. "They think it was just a harmless prank," I replied, trying to keep the anger from my voice. "But do not worry, we are moving to a different hotel tomorrow, and I have already contacted the embassy." Sydney's eyes widened. "The embassy? Is that really necessary?" "What they did was not just mean, Sydney. It was potentially criminal. Abandoning a minor without identification in a foreign country is serious, and I want to make sure there is an official record of what happened." As Sydney processed this information, I took out my phone and began making calls. First to the Jordanian family who had helped my daughter, arranging to meet them tomorrow to thank them properly. Then to a lawyer friend back home who confirmed my suspicions about the potential legal implications of what Nathan and his children had done. Finally, I sent a detailed email to the American Embassy in Amman, outlining exactly what had happened and requesting a meeting. I was not sure yet how far I wanted to take this, but I knew one thing for certain. Nathan and his children would not get away with endangering Sydney without consequences. The next morning, Sydney woke up with nightmares. She had dreamt she was lost in an endless maze of market stalls calling for help, but no one could hear her. I spent an hour just holding her and reassuring her that she was safe now, that I would not let anything like that happen again. "We are moving to a new hotel today," I reminded her, stroking her hair, "and we are going to meet the family that helped you so you can thank them properly." She nodded, her eyes still shadowed with anxiety. "What about Uncle Nathan and the others? Will they be coming too?" "No, sweetheart, I think it is best if we spend the rest of our trip separately from them." Relief flooded her face. "Good. I do not want to be around Jackson and Brooke anymore." After breakfast, we packed our belongings and prepared to check out. As we were loading our luggage onto a cart, Nathan appeared in the hallway outside our room. "Harp, can we talk?" he asked, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "Alone?" I glanced at Sydney, who tensed visibly. "Why do you not go down to the lobby and wait for me? I will be there in 5 minutes." Once she was gone, I turned to my brother. "Make it quick, Nathan. We have plans today." He ran a hand through his hair, looking genuinely distressed. "I spoke with the kids last night." "Really? Spoke with them for the first time in, well, probably too long. What they did was wrong, and I made that clear to them." I crossed my arms, unimpressed. "And I want to make this right. Please do not move to another hotel. Let me fix this. The kids have agreed to apologize to Sydney, and I promise I will keep a much closer eye on them for the rest of the trip." I studied my brother's face. There was genuine concern there, but also something else. Fear. Not of me, certainly. Then it clicked. "You are worried about the embassy report, are you not? About potential legal consequences." Nathan had the grace to look ashamed. "It is not just that. I really am sorry about what happened. But yes, I am concerned about where this could lead. Jackson is applying for internships this summer, and Brooke is waiting to hear from colleges. A legal issue could affect their futures." "Maybe they should have thought about that before abandoning their 16-year-old cousin in a foreign country," I replied coldly. "Amara, please, they are just kids. They made a mistake." "They are 19 and 17, Nathan, old enough to know better. And this was not their first mistake on this trip, just the most serious one." Nathan looked desperate now. "What will it take to convince you not to pursue this with the authorities? Name it. Anything." I considered his offer. Part of me wanted nothing more than to get Sydney away from these people and never look back. But another part of me, the part that had spent years watching Nathan bail his children out of every consequence, wanted them to truly understand the impact of their actions. After a moment of reflection, I made a decision. Here is what is going to happen. Sydney and I will stay at this hotel, but in a different wing from you. The kids will apologize to Sydney, not with some insincere mumbled sorry, but with a real acknowledgement of what they did wrong and why it was dangerous. Nathan nodded eagerly. "Of course, absolutely." "I am not finished. You will personally go to the family that helped Sydney and thank them. You will compensate them generously for their kindness, not because you can buy your way out of this, but because it is the right thing to do." "I can do that today," he agreed. "And finally, for the rest of this trip, Jackson and Brooke will participate in a volunteer project I have found at a local refugee center, 3 hours each day for the remainder of our stay." Nathan's eager nodding slowed. "A refugee center? Is that safe?" "Safer than being abandoned in a foreign city without identification," I replied sharply. "The center works with Syrian refugee children. It will give your kids some perspective on what real hardship looks like. The embassy coordinator recommended it when I spoke with her this morning." Nathan hesitated, then sighed in defeat. "Fine, if that is what it takes to put this behind us." "I have not decided yet whether to pursue formal charges," I added. "That will depend on how sincere their apologies are, and whether they complete the volunteer work without complaint." Relief washed over Nathan's face. "Thank you, Amara. I promise they will take this seriously." "They better, because if anything like this happens again, I will not hesitate to involve the authorities fully. And Nathan, you need to take a hard look at how you are raising those kids. Money will not protect them forever." He nodded solemnly. "I know. I think I have known that for a while, but it was easier to just let things slide." I left him in the hallway and joined Sydney in the lobby. I explained the new arrangement to her, watching her face carefully for her reaction. "Are you okay with staying here if we move to a different floor?" I asked. "We can still go elsewhere if you prefer." Sydney thought about it. If they apologize for real, and if I do not have to spend time with them unless I want to, then I guess it is okay. This hotel does have the best view of the city. And how do you feel about them volunteering at the refugee center? You would not have to go if you do not want to. To my surprise, Sydney straightened her shoulders. Actually, I think I would like to go too. Not with them, but maybe on different days. I have been reading about the Syrian refugee situation, and I would like to help if I can. Pride swelled in my chest. Despite everything, my daughter remained compassionate and thoughtful. That can be arranged. Later that day, Nathan brought Jackson and Brooke to our new room for their apology. Both teenagers looked uncomfortable and slightly resentful, but Nathan gave them a stern look and they began. "I am sorry for leaving you in the market," Jackson said, his eyes on the floor. "It was dangerous and stupid." "And for taking your money," Brooke added, when Nathan cleared his throat meaningfully. "That was theft, and it was wrong." Sydney watched them silently, her face unreadable, and Nathan prompted. Jackson sighed heavily. "And we are sorry for all the other stuff too, the comments and pranks and being jerks the whole trip." It was not the most elegant apology, but I could tell they were genuinely uncomfortable, which was probably as close to remorse as they could manage at this point. "Thank you for apologizing," Sydney said formally. "I accept your apology, but I need some time before I can trust you again." Nathan nodded. "That is fair." "Very fair," he turned to me. "We are going to the refugee center tomorrow morning to set up the volunteer schedule, and I have arranged to meet the family who helped Sydney this afternoon." "Good," I replied. "Sydney and I have plans for today, but perhaps we could all have dinner together tomorrow night. A fresh start." As they left, I noticed Sydney watching them thoughtfully. "Do you think they really mean it?" she asked once the door closed behind them. "I think they are sorry they got caught and that there might be consequences," I replied honestly. But sometimes that is where real change begins. Having to face the results of your actions can be a powerful teacher. Over the next few days, a strange new dynamic emerged. Jackson and Brooke spent their mornings at the refugee center, returning subdued and thoughtful. Sydney volunteered on alternate afternoons, coming back with stories about the resilient children she had met and the art projects they had created together. Nathan made a genuine effort to connect with both of us, asking Sydney about her interests and actually listening to her responses. He seemed to be making an effort with his own children as well, engaging with them rather than just placating them with money or privileges. One evening, about 4 days after the market incident, Jackson approached Sydney during dinner with an unexpected question. "That girl at the center, the one who does not speak, did you manage to get her to talk to you?" Sydney looked surprised at his interest. "Amira? No, but she drew a picture for me today. The volunteer coordinator says she has not spoken since crossing the border 2 years ago." "I brought her a coloring book yesterday," Jackson admitted. "She seemed to like it." A small moment, but significant. Perhaps there was hope for my nephew after all. Our trip was scheduled to end in 3 days, and I had not yet decided whether to pursue formal charges against Nathan and his children. The embassy had taken my report seriously, explaining that abandoning a minor without documentation in a foreign country could potentially lead to charges of child endangerment and reckless conduct. But I could see changes, small but meaningful, in both Jackson and Brooke. Was it enough? I was not sure. I needed more time to observe, to determine if their remorse was genuine or merely a performance to avoid consequences. On our last full day in Jordan, I suggested a final excursion to the Dead Sea. It would be a good test, I thought, to see how everyone behaved in a more relaxed setting. Nathan eagerly agreed, arranging for a private driver to take us to one of the resort beaches. Onyankaz. We floated in the unusually buoyant water. I watched Jackson actually helping Sydney take photos for her social media, positioning her to get the best lighting for the classic reading a newspaper while floating shot. Brooke offered Sydney some of her expensive sunscreen. A small gesture, but one that would have been unthinkable a week ago. That evening, back at the hotel, I made my final decision. I would not pursue charges, but neither would I pretend that what happened was insignificant. Actions have consequences, sometimes lasting ones. I sent an email to my contact at the embassy, thanking her for her assistance, but informing her that I would not be proceeding with formal complaints. However, I asked her to keep the report on file just in case. Then I called Sydney's therapist back home and arranged for an appointment the day after our return. The incident had been traumatic for her, and I wanted to ensure she had professional support in processing it. Finally, I made one last call to the director of the refugee center, making a substantial donation in Sydney's name and arranging for us to continue supporting their work from home. As I prepared for bed, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. Anger still simmered beneath the surface, but there was also a sense of accomplishment. My daughter had shown remarkable resilience, and I had stood firm in demanding accountability. More importantly, perhaps Nathan and his children had learned something valuable about privilege, responsibility, and the real meaning of family. Tomorrow, we would return home, and our lives would go back to normal. But something had shifted in our family dynamic, and I suspected those changes would be permanent. The morning of our departure began with an unexpected commotion. At precisely 5 o'clock a.m., a loud banging echoed through the hotel corridor. Half asleep, I opened our door to see what was happening, only to witness an extraordinary scene unfolding outside Nathan's suite. Two uniformed Jordanian police officers stood at his door, accompanied by a hotel security manager and a stern-looking woman in a business suit who I recognized as Miss Patterson from the American Embassy. Nathan appeared in the doorway, his hair disheveled and his face confused as he clutched a hastily donned bathrobe. "Mr. Walsh," one of the officers said formally, "we need to speak with you and your children immediately regarding a serious incident involving your niece." Nathan spotted me watching from down the hall, and his eyes widened in shock and betrayal. I simply shook my head, equally surprised by this development. I had explicitly informed the embassy that I would not be pursuing charges. Miss Patterson noticed me and approached while the officers entered Nathan's room. "Mrs. Lewis, I apologize for the early hour. Could we speak privately for a moment?" Inside our room, with Sydney still asleep, Miss Patterson explained the situation in hushed tones. "Your initial report triggered a mandatory investigation protocol," she said. "While you indicated you would not pursue personal charges, the abandonment of a minor in a foreign country without documentation falls under several international agreements that Jordan takes very seriously. The authorities decided to proceed with their own investigation." "I did not intend for this to happen," I admitted, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. "I thought my email made it clear I was not seeking further action." "Your email arrived after the Jordanian authorities had already begun their process," she explained. "And frankly, even if it had arrived earlier, they likely would have proceeded anyway. This is not just about your family situation. Jordan is working hard to maintain its reputation as a safe destination for Western tourists. They take incidents like this very seriously." Before I could respond, Sydney stirred and sat up in bed, rubbing her eyes. "Mom, what is going on? Who is this?" After introductions and a brief explanation, Miss Patterson addressed Sydney directly. "Your cousin Jackson is 19, legally an adult, both in the United States and Jordan," she explained gently. "His actions in abandoning you without identification constitute a more serious offense than those of your 17-year-old cousin. Would you be willing to provide a formal statement about what happened?" Sydney looked at me uncertainly. I squeezed her hand. "It is your decision, sweetheart. Whatever you choose, I will support you." After a moment's consideration, Sydney nodded. "I will tell them what happened. It is the truth, after all." Over the next few hours, our departure plans were put on hold as Sydney and I provided formal statements to the Jordanian authorities. We described in detail the events at the market, including Jackson taking Sydney's emergency money and the cousins deliberately leaving her in an unfamiliar area. The officers interviewed us separately, then together, their questions thorough and professional. They seemed particularly concerned about the premeditated nature of the abandonment, noting that it did not appear to be an impulsive action, but rather a planned prank, with deliberate disregard for Sydney's safety. Meanwhile, Nathan, Jackson, and Brooke were being questioned in a separate room. Through the hotel lobby, I caught glimpses of their increasingly distressed expressions as the morning wore on. Around noon, Miss Patterson updated us on the situation. "Mr. Walsh and his children will not be permitted to leave Jordan today as scheduled. Their passports have been temporarily confiscated pending further investigation and possible charges." "Charges?" I echoed, my stomach tightening. Despite everything, Nathan was still my brother. "For Mr. Walsh, likely negligent supervision and endangerment of a minor. For Jackson, the potential charges are more serious, including child endangerment and theft. As Brooke is still a minor herself, her situation is more complicated, but she may face juvenile proceedings." Sydney looked stricken. "I did not want them to go to jail. I just wanted them to understand what they did was wrong." Miss Patterson smiled gently. It is unlikely anyone will serve jail time for a first offense, especially given that you were ultimately unharmed, but there will be significant fines, and they may be required to remain in Jordan for several weeks during the legal process. What about our flight home? I asked, suddenly remembering our scheduled departure was in just a few hours. You and Sydney are free to leave as planned. In fact, we recommend it. The embassy can arrange for Sydney to provide any additional testimony remotely if needed. We returned to our room to pack, both of us quiet and thoughtful. As I folded Sydney's clothes, a knock came at the door. It was Nathan, looking more disheveled and defeated than I had ever seen him. "Can I talk to you?" he asked, his voice strained. "Alone?" Sydney nodded and stepped into the bathroom, giving us privacy. "Did you know this would happen?" Nathan demanded as soon as the bathroom door closed. "Did you plan this?" "No," I replied honestly. I told the embassy I was not pursuing charges, but apparently abandoning a minor without documentation triggers automatic protocols here. Nathan collapsed into a chair, his head in his hands. "They took our passports, Amara. They are talking about keeping us here for weeks, maybe months. Jackson could face serious charges that would affect his college status, his internships, everything." For the first time, I felt a twinge of sympathy for my brother. "I am sorry it came to this, Nathan, truly. But actions have consequences, and what Jackson and Brooke did was seriously wrong. Can you talk to them? Tell them it was just a stupid prank that got out of hand, that you do not want to press charges." "I already did that, Nathan. But this is not just about what I want anymore. Jordan has its own laws about child safety and abandonment." Nathan looked up, desperation in his eyes. "What about Sydney? If she says it was not that serious, are you seriously asking me to have my daughter lie to authorities about what happened after what your children put her through?" My sympathy evaporated instantly. "I am not asking her to lie, just to maybe emphasize that she was never in real danger, that it was a misunderstanding." "But that would be a lie. Nathan, she was in real danger. She was terrified. And the only reason she made it back safely was because a kind local family helped her, not because of anything you or your children did." Nathan fell silent, the reality of the situation finally seeming to sink in. After a moment, he spoke again, his voice quieter. "What should I do, Amara?" It was the first time in our adult lives that my brother had asked for my advice with genuine humility. "Be honest. Take responsibility. Make it clear to the authorities that you understand the seriousness of what happened, and that you are committed to ensuring nothing like this ever happens again. And most importantly, use this as a wake-up call about how you are raising Jackson and Brooke." Nathan nodded slowly. "The lawyer they assigned me said the fines could be substantial." "Probably less than what you spent on this vacation," I pointed out. "Consider it an expensive lesson in parenting." When Nathan left, Sydney emerged from the bathroom. "Are they going to be okay?" she asked, concern evident in her voice despite everything. "They will be fine," I assured her. "They will face consequences, but nothing that will ruin their lives. Just enough to hopefully teach them an important lesson." We finished packing and headed to the airport, leaving Nathan and his children to deal with the Jordanian legal system. Our flight home was long and quiet, both of us processing the unexpected turn of events. As we finally landed in Minneapolis, Sydney turned to me. "Do you think they will change? Really change?" I considered the question carefully. "I hope so, sweetheart. Sometimes it takes a serious wake-up call for people to recognize the need to change. This might be theirs." "I am still angry about what they did," Sydney admitted, "but I also feel kind of bad for them now." "That is because you have empathy, which is something Jackson and Brooke could use more of. Being able to feel compassion for people who have wronged you shows remarkable strength of character." As we collected our luggage and headed home, I realized that despite the trauma and drama of our family reunion trip, Sydney had indeed gained something valuable, though not what any of us had expected. She had discovered her own resilience, the importance of standing up for herself, and the complex reality that sometimes the people who should protect you the most can be the ones who hurt you. And perhaps Nathan and his children were learning equally important lessons halfway across the world. Coming home to our modest apartment after the luxury hotels of Jordan felt surprisingly comforting. The familiar surroundings, the photographs on the walls, even the slightly temperamental refrigerator that hummed too loudly at night, all represented safety and stability after our chaotic trip. Sydney slept for nearly 14 hours that first night back, her body and mind exhausted from the stress and time zone changes. When she finally emerged from her bedroom the next afternoon, her eyes were clearer, but I could still see the shadows of anxiety lingering there. I had nightmares again, she admitted, over a late breakfast of scrambled eggs and toast. I was lost in the market, but this time no one helped me. I just kept wandering and wandering. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. That is normal after what you went through. Your mind is processing the fear you experienced. Will it stop eventually? Yes, I assured her, especially if we get you some help processing everything. True to my word, I had scheduled an appointment with Dr. Reynolds, a therapist specializing in trauma and adolescent psychology. Sydney had seen her briefly after the divorce, and they had established a good rapport. Do you really think I need therapy? Sydney asked, pushing her eggs around her plate. I mean, nothing actually happened to me. Not really. Being abandoned in a foreign country where you do not speak the language, without money or identification, is a genuinely traumatic experience, I explained gently. And trauma is not just about what physically happened, but about how it made you feel, the fear and helplessness you experienced. Sydney nodded slowly. I keep thinking about what could have happened if that family had not helped me. Those what-ifs can be overwhelming. Dr. Reynolds can help you process those thoughts in a healthy way. Over the next few weeks, Sydney attended weekly sessions with Dr. Reynolds. While I tried to reestablish our normal routine, I returned to work. She went back to school, and we settled into our familiar patterns. But there were changes too. Subtle shifts in our relationship and in Sydney herself. She became more cautious about certain things, double-checking that she had her phone and ID before leaving the house. She was warier of crowds and would occasionally grip my hand in busy public spaces, something she had outgrown years ago. But there were positive changes too. She seemed more appreciative of our stable, if modest, life. She spoke up more assertively when something bothered her, no longer afraid to express her boundaries. About 3 weeks after our return, I received an email from Miss Patterson at the American Embassy in Jordan. She informed me that Nathan had paid substantial fines to the Jordanian authorities, approximately $20,000 in total. Jackson had been required to perform 200 hours of community service at the refugee center and attend a series of educational sessions about respecting other cultures and responsible travel. Brooke, as a minor, had received a lesser punishment, but was also required to complete community service. They had been allowed to return to the United States after 4 weeks in Jordan with the agreement that Jackson would continue his community service at home under supervision. I shared the news with Sydney, who received it thoughtfully. Do you think the community service will actually change them? She asked. I hope so. Working with people who have genuine hardships can be eye-opening for someone who has been privileged their entire life. The refugee center changed how I see things, Sydney admitted. Those kids had lost everything, their homes, sometimes their families, and yet many of them were still so hopeful and resilient, it made our problems seem smaller somehow. We heard nothing directly from Nathan or his children for nearly 2 months. Then, unexpectedly, a package arrived at our door. Inside was a handwritten letter from Nathan and separate notes from both Jackson and Brooke. Nathan's letter was heartfelt and humble, acknowledging his failures as both a brother and a father. He explained that the time in Jordan dealing with the legal consequences had forced him to seriously reflect on his parenting and values. He had enrolled himself and both children in family therapy upon their return, and they were working through their issues together for the first time. Jackson's note was shorter, but surprisingly sincere. He apologized again for endangering Sydney and admitted that his community service had been a wake-up call about his privilege and behavior. He enclosed a donation receipt showing he had contributed $5,000 of his own trust fund money to the refugee center in Amman. Brooke's letter revealed the most transformation. She wrote about how ashamed she felt about her behavior and how the community service had introduced her to people whose resilience and kindness, despite tremendous hardship, had humbled her. She had changed her college plans, now intending to study international relations with a focus on refugee assistance, and had applied for a summer internship with a humanitarian organization. Sydney read all 3 letters carefully, then set them aside without comment. A week later, she asked if she could respond. I think I'm ready to talk to them, she said. Not in person yet, but maybe by email. Are you sure? I asked, wanting to protect her, but also recognizing her need to process the experience in her own way. Yes, Dr. Reynolds thinks it might help give me closure. Sydney's response to her cousins was thoughtful and mature beyond her years. She acknowledged their apologies and expressed hope for their continued growth, while also honestly describing the impact their actions had had on her sense of safety and trust. She ended by saying she was open to rebuilding their relationship slowly, perhaps starting with video calls before considering in-person meetings. To my surprise, both Jackson and Brooke responded respectfully, accepting her terms without pushing for faster reconciliation. Nathan reached out to me separately, asking if we could begin our own healing process as siblings. 6 months after the Jordan incident, Sydney's nightmares had largely subsided. Her sessions with Dr. Reynolds had decreased to once a month, and she had channeled her experience into positive action, starting a peer support group at her school for students dealing with anxiety and trauma. "I never thought something so scary could end up helping other people," she told me one evening as we prepared dinner together. "But when I share my story in group, it helps others feel less alone with their own fears." "That is how healing often works," I replied. "We take our wounds and transform them into wisdom that can help others." Sydney nodded thoughtfully. "I have been thinking about forgiving Jackson and Brooke, not forgetting what they did, but letting go of the anger. Dr. Reynolds says holding on to resentment is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die." Her maturity continually amazed me. That is a wise perspective. Forgiveness is more about freeing yourself than absolving them. "I think I am ready for a video call with them. Would that be okay?" "Of course, if you feel ready." The first video call was awkward but civil. Jackson and Brooke were subdued, careful with their words, and genuinely interested in Sydney's life. They shared updates about their community service and the changes they were making. It was a small step, but a significant one on the path to healing. As for Nathan and me, our relationship was slowly mending too. The experience had humbled him, stripping away some of the materialistic focus that had dominated his life since his success in business. He spoke more openly about his struggles as a single father after Lauren's death, admitting that he had used money and indulgence to avoid dealing with the emotional needs of his children. "I thought I could buy their happiness," he confessed during one of our phone conversations. "But all I did was teach them that money could solve any problem, that they did not have to take responsibility for their actions." "It is never too late to teach different lessons," I assured him. A year after the Jordan incident, we agreed to a family gathering at a neutral location, a lakeside cabin a few hours from the city. The weekend was not perfect. There were moments of tension and old patterns threatening to resurface, but there were also genuine connections forming. Sydney and Brooke discovered a shared interest in international affairs, while Jackson surprised everyone by apologizing individually to each of us for specific hurtful actions or comments from the past. On our last night at the cabin, sitting around a campfire under the stars, Nathan raised his mug of hot chocolate in a toast. "To second chances," he said simply, "and to the sister who cared enough to hold me accountable when no one else would." I nodded in acknowledgement, feeling a complex mix of emotions, pride in our growth, but also a realistic understanding that our healing journey was ongoing. True change takes time, consistent effort, and genuine commitment. As for Sydney, the traumatized girl from Jordan had transformed into a more confident, compassionate young woman. Her experience had sparked an interest in international law and human rights, and she was now researching college programs in those fields. "I want to help protect vulnerable people," she explained when I asked about her new passion, "especially kids and teens who find themselves in dangerous situations not of their own making." The journey from victim to advocate is a powerful one, and watching Sydney make that transformation filled me with profound pride. She had taken a traumatic experience and used it to fuel her growth and deepen her empathy for others. As we drove home from the cabin, Sydney gazed thoughtfully out the window at the passing landscape. "You know what I learned from everything that happened?" she said suddenly. "What is that, sweetheart?" "That family is not just about blood relations. It is about who shows up for you when you are vulnerable, like that Jordanian family who helped me. They were more family to me in that moment than Jackson and Brooke were." "That is very true," I agreed. "But I also learned that sometimes people can change if they are given the right wake-up call. Jackson and Brooke are not the same people they were a year ago." "No, they are not," I acknowledged, "and neither are you. You are stronger, wiser, and more compassionate than ever." Sydney smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "I would never want to go through that again, but I am not sorry it happened. It taught me who I am and what I am capable of surviving." That night, as I watched Sydney sleeping peacefully, I reflected on our extraordinary journey. What had begun as a disastrous family trip had ultimately led to profound healing and growth for all of us. The bonds that had been broken were slowly being rewoven, stronger in some ways for having been tested. There would always be a scar from what happened in Jordan, a memory of fear and betrayal that could never be completely erased. But scars also represent survival, resilience, and the body's remarkable ability to heal itself. The same is true for emotional wounds. They mark us but do not define us. They remind us of our pain, but also of our strength. Has your family ever betrayed your trust? And how did you rebuild those relationships afterward? I would love to hear your experiences in the comments below. And if you found my story meaningful, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that healing is possible even after profound betrayal. Thank you for joining me on this journey. And remember, sometimes the people who hurt us the most also give us the opportunity to discover our greatest strength.